Hey, Bob Coppedge, Cross Shield Geek, CEO Simplex-IT, comments for MSPs, whatever. Happy Memorial Day. And for about the last month, I've been using the story of George Washington, the Continental Army, in Valley Forge when I'm talking with organizations about what best to do during the whole shutdown, pandemic, and all that, as a metaphor or an example of how to take a horrible, horrible situation and improve your organization. And I finally decided, I got to put this down in some kind of article or video or the like. And so I did a little bit more research into it, and I found out it, in some ways, is even more appropriate than I thought it was, and but for different reasons, which is kind of interesting. So just to refresh your memory, because I'm sure you're well aware of it, in the winter of 1777, the Continental Army, which was headed by George Washington, who later became the dollar bill, as we all know, the Brits had just taken Philadelphia, which for all purposes was the capital of the Continental Congress, or the host of the Continental Congress, and pretty much the Army was not in the best of shape, the Continental Army. And you need to remember that the Continental Congress would enact edicts, or they would approve things, or they would whatever. But the states would then be the ones to actually say, yes, we'll do that. So there was absolutely a tremendous power shift there. And this played into the whole situation at Valley Forge. Now, what ended up happening is there were about 12,000 troops, and the decision was made, and it was not a simple decision, to winter in Valley Forge, which is sort of nearby Pennsylvania. And about 2,000 of those soldiers, and I shouldn't say soldiers, it included soldiers, it included women, it included children, it included the artists, the professionals, the blacksmiths, that sort of thing. And about 1,500 to 2,000 of them died not through freezing. Most people always think of Valley Forge as it was this absolutely horrible winter. It wasn't. It was actually, I don't want to say mild, but there were times where it was above freezing, below freezing. Pretty much nobody died of because they froze to death. They died from malnutrition. They died from disease, especially smallpox. But here's the thing. All of the organizational woes that faced Washington and his troops from about December 77 to June or so of 78, which obviously gets a little past winter, were dealt with in some level or another during this period of time. In other words, Washington, as a leader of an organization, took advantage, and boy did he. Take a look at the leadership styles in the process. He absolutely took advantage of this otherwise horrible circumstance and introduced the first really formalized quartermaster, which is basically the guy who handles all of the supplies, and really nailed that puppy down. Because there were a lot of supplies that were approved but never delivered, or delivered but never appropriately, or by the time they got delivered they were spoiled or whatever. He really took the time and insistence and worked with both Continental Congress and states to make sure that the quartermaster program was significantly improved. And then we always hear about Baron von Steuben, which we're in Ohio, so Steubenville. Who came from Europe and essentially really created a much more standardized training program. Now, there already were training programs in place, but they were inconsistent. And you got to remember, at this point in time, the Continental Army had spent the last 2 years fighting constantly, so they never had a chance to really standardize, learn, and implement from the lessons that they had gathered over the last couple of years. Now, think about that from your organization's standpoint. If you had time to actually step back and implement some of the standards, some of the lessons, some of the all of those organizational principles that you've learned over the past couple of years, and you implemented those, wouldn't your organization be in a better place? What are you doing now? By the end of this time, again around June 78, the Continental Army was not this wonderful, perfect organization. There were still pieces and parts of it. There were still inconsistencies in terms of training, in terms of the rigors of how the soldiers actually applied the lessons and all that. But they had a framework, and they had a guide, and they had standardized training. And they were able to actually, and again, not overnight, but they had a much better chance against the British, which is why we don't talk with those funny British accents anymore. So, to you, I say, if you're an organizational leader, what are you doing? What are you using to make this your Valley Forge in terms of improving your organization? And if as an individual, what are you doing in terms of developing your own personal skills? Bob Coppedge, Crotchety Old Geek. Happy Memorial Day.